Hi, my name is Barbara Worley. I am a PhD student and graduate research assistant at the University of Georgia in the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences in the Department of Agricultural Leadership, Education, and Communication. Today, I'm going to be presenting the dynamic model of food culture and analyzing culture in global foodways. Now, the name of this presentation has been changed slightly since the abstract was submitted due to a change in the name of my conceptual framework for my dissertation study, because this is the conceptual framework of my dissertation work. Cuisine constructs and upholds a community of discourse, a collectivity held together by words, by language, by interpretations of the world in which we live. That's Ferguson, 2004. So background and introduction of this framework. Post-humanistic advancements in agriculture across scientific areas of inquiry, created traditionally by natural scientists and disseminated through the work of social scientists, still brandish a disconnect in accounting for behavior change. And while environmental and social impacts of agricultural innovations have been studied in tandem, it can be noted that a gap still exists in understanding the cultural and heritage implications of modernization. Thus, there is a missing link between adoption of agricultural innovations and preservation of food culture and heritage. Therefore, it is imperative that effectively communicating agricultural innovations, specifically in a cultural context, is actualized to mitigate factors that could potentially hinder the diffusion and adoption processes. This presentation introduces a conceptual framework that is based on three dynamic constructs: heritage, practice, and power. And those are in no particular order. This framework methodologically integrates critical discourse analysis to emphasize the relationship between adoption of agricultural innovations and preservation of food culture and heritage. Critical discourse analysis is applied to support and examine the creation of discursive spaces, spaces that serve as formative areas for honoring foodways, acknowledging cultural histories, and addressing injustices. These formative areas thereby constitute and situate the value of a conceptual framework that can be utilized for understanding the multifaceted relationship between food and culture. So by situating agricultural innovations into each of those three constructs, the formation of discursive spaces of preservation can be actualized to bring forth awareness of cultural benefits, notwithstanding previous community acceptance and adoption in relation to their food, culture, and heritage. So the purpose and objectives of the study and conceptual framework. The purpose is to provide a foundation for introducing innovations through potential modalities, such as extension in an international context, for understanding food culture and heritage. Therefore, the objectives are to demonstrate the applicability and essentiality of the three constructs, heritage, power, and practice, in relation to agricultural innovations in both a domestic and, of course, international context. Also, to examine the relationship between creators, and in this context, we are looking at those as being people such as research scientists, and disseminators, people such as social scientists or extension agents of agricultural innovations, and local food, culture, and heritage. So the theoretical themes. A synthesis of theories and models has guided the development and application of this framework in the global context of analysis of agricultural innovations, including the culture-centered approach by Dutta, diffusion of innovations, Rogers, and cultural identity theory, Collier and Thomas. The theoretical approaches underlying the development of the conceptual framework combine critical and deconstructivist perspectives, allowing for the examination of aspects that contribute to an alterity of cultural foodways. So the methodological approach. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be applying critical discourse analysis. And so the interconnectivity between innovation and foodways can be determined using critical discourse analysis through two methods: discourse historical approach, or DHA, and dialectical relational approach, or DRA. The discourse historical approach, DHA, provides pathways to link historic causation with suggested outcomes through analysis of archives, literature, and so forth. Situating DHA in each of those three constructs enables an analysis of how the phenomenon of food heritage preservation has been historically, and historically being the key word here, examined for identifying discursive spaces. Dialectical relational approach, or DRA, is used to examine contemporary, so we have historic versus contemporary, participant discourse around the semiotics of food and culture to potentially reveal any tensions that exist within and between each of those three constructs. So now the conceptual framework of heritage, power, and practice that's known as the dynamic model of food and culture. So in order to foster an understanding of why it's important to examine the role of food within and of culture, outlining the integrated relationship and areas of paradox between the three constructs is necessitated if there is to be a critical dialogue that disrupts the dominant paradigm. Thus, the dynamic model of food and culture will provide for the emancipation of food and its associated cultural position through an understanding of the past as it relates to the present and future. Food as a critical component of culture is thus positioned in a framework comprised of these three dynamic constructs: heritage, or the origin of cuisine and the manifestation of foodways; practice, being operationalized as the representation and interpretation of food and foodways; and power, the structural, systematic, and evocative nature of food, foodways, and food culture. While these constructs have been addressed separately in the literature, an absence still exists in an explicit analysis of the transmuting, often contested, dialectical relationship with each other. I will give just a brief description and justification for the inclusion of each construct in this framework now. So let's begin with heritage. As I noted, is operationalized as the origin of cuisine and the manifestation of foodways. Positioning food as heritage provides an understanding of food as it is situated historically within culture, including the origin of cuisine and tradition, the manifestation of foodways from an amalgamation of cultural influences. Analyzing the representation of food cultures of a particular community helps us to understand how that community connects to the past, lives in the present, and imagines the future. Practice is operationalized in the framework as the representation and interpretation of food and foodways. Fairclough, 2005, describes the relationship between social structure and social events as being social practice, a semiotic element of discourse. He goes on to note that social practices and, at a concrete level, even social events, are articulations of diverse social elements, including semiosis. Therefore, from a realist social ontology perspective, it would position food both as a social element and a social practice, and therefore a semiotic element of discourse, and thus it is appropriate for inclusion in this model. And the third construct, power, operationalized as the structural, systematic, and evocative nature of food and foodways. Power is a concept central to all social sciences. Wessel and Jones, 2001, note that food plays a distinctive role in everyday life and is inextricably linked to the economic, social, and political circuits of culture. Therefore, food as power provides a space for analysis of the structural, systematic, and evocative nature of food, both historically in DHA and contemporarily DRA, to gain an understanding of the prevailing role it plays in our society. So where does this bring us? So by analyzing the contested intersections that exist between and within the three constructs of heritage, power, and practice, an examination of how each aspect is sustained in the dialectic can be assumed to create discursive spaces. That little blue dot in the middle of the conceptual framework, the discursive space. The result is a means to critique what has been misunderstood in the relationship between innovation and adoption from a cultural perspective. Garnering an understanding of the tensions between and within each aspect of the conceptual framework will therefore allow for the application of the modeled concept to analysis of food heritage in a global context. So the implications, where do we go from here? As we are operating in an era where both industry and academia strive for diffusing advancements in products and processes for increased social impact, we really must concern ourselves with whether we're failing to account for preservation of heritage or if therein lies the dialectic in cultural consciousness and fostering global development. For example, innovations developed for reducing vitamin A deficiency, such as orange flesh sweet potatoes and orange corn, resulted in less than optimal adoption rates due to community perception and cultural unfamiliarity. As innovations are examined through each of the three constructs within the framework, the merging of creator, disseminator, and adopter becomes fluid, thereby centering, restoring, or sustaining community agency. The dynamic model of food and culture, therefore, provides for a fusion of partnerships to enhance social impact. Numerous pages of references, but I really want to thank you for your time. Again, I'm Barbara Worley. This is my final year as a PhD student and graduate research assistant at University of Georgia. And I really want to thank my advisor and chair, Abigail Boron, associate professor at University of Georgia. And here is our contact. Thank you so much.